This programme was produced at and first aired on MPR, Manawatu People's Radio, with support from New Zealand On Air. Ka pai Irarangi Tamotu, MPR.
Kia ora, this is Hugh. I'm the host. I'm talking now in post-production. This episode, we had a couple of technical issues, particularly Zoom did not play ball for us in a consistent way. You're going to hear a bit of audio disruption on Sophia's voice, in particular on this episode, and there is one point in the second half where we actually just stop, turn cameras off, and start again. So just be aware of that. It's not quite up to my usual standard, but I thought the conversation was good enough that we should keep the episode anyway. Kia ora and welcome to Reserved Recommendations, a show about problematic faves, great trash, difficult art, and our complex relationship with art and entertainment. My name's Hugh, I'm the host, and I'd like to put in a very mild content warning for this show as a whole. Sometimes our recommendations on this show are reserved just because the thing that we're discussing is in some way not good. But sometimes there are aspects to the art or artist that may be confronting for some people. Read the episode descriptions for more information and do be aware of your listening environment. Kia ora and welcome to another episode of Reserved Recommendations. This is a show about great trash, problematic faves and difficult relationships with art and culture. And I'm very pleased to be joined this evening by Sophia Frentz. Should I be calling you Doctor?
You can if you want. I do appreciate being called Doctor.
Well,
it's still new enough that it's exciting.
Dr. Sophia Frentz, then. It's always good to call doctors. It's if only to confuse people who expect all doctors to be medical doctors.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Now, ordinarily, the kinds of conversations I have on here tend to be about things with which I'm at least a bit kind of familiar, and this is not the case at all. You're going to be entirely enlightening me into which of the kind of categories of great trash or problematic fave or all of the above the thing we're talking about fits. Because you said you wanted to talk about Zumba.
Yes, I am a Zumba tragic, and I would say it falls into all of the above, and we can absolutely talk about like sort of that intersection of great trash and problematic fave. On and off, I've been doing Zumba, once a week for about 4 years now, and during the pandemic it's been more often because my wonderful Zumba instructor has been doing online classes, and so there was a point in time where we were just boogieing it out about 3 times a week. So Zumba is just a style of dance workouts which focuses on sort of Latin American and Spanish inspired like dances, moves and music. They'll sometimes put in some pop songs in there just for fun. And as we will talk about when we talk about problematic fave, sometimes there's a Bollywood track in there. Oh boy.
Well, I mean, so
I adore it. I think.
So I mean, that's kind of a perfect description of the concept of great trash, which is something that I don't feel like I've had an opportunity to really unpack in the course of the show yet. And it's an idea that I really like. I'm sure it came from somewhere else, but I saw it first on a YouTube video from a guy called Dan Olson, who goes by Foldable Ideas. And he was talking about great trash as a way of combating the idea of guilty pleasures. Like, you should never feel guilty about the things that you enjoy. If you enjoy trash, then just be prepared to say that your trash is great trash and maybe say why.
Oh, like 100%. I think I'm not at all guilty about enjoying Zumba. I try and tell everyone in my life how great Zumba is and how awesome my instructor is and how they should all come to Zumba classes with me. And a lot of people laugh at me. And that's why it's my great trash.
So, I mean, maybe we do the great bit first. What was it about, because you said you've been doing this for about 4 years. What was it that kind of initially grabbed you about it, and what was it that kept you there?
So I'm a big fan of dance exercise. I'm one of those aged out, sort of childhood dances. Where I studied dance for about 10 years when I was in school, up until I was sort of 15, 16, and then I stopped. And then I sort of on and off did my undergraduate university. Otago has the Otago Dance Association there, so I did a bunch of classes with them just for fun. And then when I moved to Melbourne, I just found it was such a joyful way to be active. And I think a lot of these kind of group fitness things, whether they're Zumba, whether they're Les Mills, whether they're something else, they're really built on community. And certainly, like, my Zumba instructor is probably the person I've spoken most to in isolation. But also, like, everyone else who goes there gives me, like, this really firm sense of community where I'll, like, see them out and around in the supermarket. And it was something that when I just moved to, like, a new city, my first international move entirely by myself, like, that was something that really grounded me and made me want to keep coming back. As well as that, like, I like to be active. And if I'm getting a boogie on to be active, like, that's a wonderful thing to be doing.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me, I'm someone who's always struggled with physical activity. I largely blame physical education at school, to be honest. Because there was always a really big focus on either being good at sport or on, like, kind of pain as purification, and I don't find either of those things particularly appealing.
Yeah, I think, like, so I did a surprising amount of sport in high school for anyone who knows me. But very little of it was in the, like, quote unquote, what you should be doing as sport, right? Like, cross country, no thank you. 12-minute run, goodbye. Netball, get out of here. I liked dancing. I liked swimming. And when I was in high school, I liked playing underwater hockey. That's what I was about. And so I think Zumba kind of taps into that. Like, I wouldn't say it's niche, like hundreds of thousands of people across the world do it, but, like, it's niche enough for people of my age group. Like, for context for listeners, like, I'm 28, not 50, like a lot of people who go to Zumba are. And that's kind of, it's nice to have this thing where I like it. And if my friends don't like it, that's kind of okay, because, like, I get what I need out of it. And everyone who goes there, like, is also sort of unapologetically enthusiastic about Zumba.
Yeah, and it's kind of cool to be part of a community who are unapologetically enthusiastic about something that the rest of the world has maybe a hard time getting their heads around. I mean, that's the primary appeal of most nerdy hobbies. It's not the primary appeal, but it's kind of a big part of self-identifying as nerdy. And I was tied up with the Morris dancers in Dunedin for a long time. And again, very much the same thing. You spend a lot of time getting good at and being proud of being good at something that most people look very sideways at indeed.
Yes. Of course, as I'm sure you're aware, I accidentally missed out mentioning Morris dancing as part of my dance history, which I was, of course, also involved in that. But I think I like to be active. And it's only really very recently that I've actually started getting into, like, maybe more traditional active things like running and just, like, you quote unquote normal, whatever that means, aerobic activities. And so things that allow me to be active and kind of, like, get a sweat going and, almost work out without having that singular focus on, as you were saying, right, like pain as purification, or, like, as often happens in women's exercise classes, like this idea that you want to have, like, a body that fits into the little black dress. You want to look good for someone. Just, like, removing that focus on aesthetic and performance and exercise. And, like, my Zumba instructor, and this can very much differ between instructors, as any instructor-led thing can. Like, my instructor is very much just like, you go one way, I go the other way. It's all good. You totally get lost and you just have a little chill out sesh down the back. Like, that's fine too. What matters is you're here and you're having fun. And I think, like, that focus really appeals to me in a lot of ways. Both because, like, the sort of shared pain of PE at school, like, really can warp your relationship with exercise in really awful ways. But also just like, I want to have a space where I can just kind of let go and have fun. And Zumba has been that space for me. Like, even when I was studying my PhD and just having like the worst days, I could turn up to Zumba and just have a dance and not think about it. And that was like so good for me. And even now, like, I talk to my instructor and she's like, I do classes as much for me as for you. I need to have a dance and not think about COVID. It's like, that's great. That's what I want from my exercise. I just want it to be another space in my life where I can be happy.
So, I mean, I agree with all of those things. They all sound fantastic. Maybe we kind of progress through the order of things, sort of from great to trash to problematic. I mean, obviously, there's kind of a perception of Zumba. You talked about you're 28 and not in your mid-50s stereotype, but I mean, how do you perceive it as being sort of trash, for want of a better word?
Trash. I will argue until the end of days that Zumba is not trash, but I think I kind of understand that, like, the idea of Zumba and a lot of the appeal of Zumba is as, less intense exercise for women of a certain age, right? Like, the very first Zumba class I went to, like, my mum took me to, kind of thing, right? And I think that's mutable, as sort of stereotypes often are, particularly with like something as fresh and new in the world as Zumba. But it is still very much like, I tell my friends I do Zumba and they laugh at me because, like, that's something that old people do, and it's like, it's not very cool and it's not very sexy. And like, even I spoke to some friends who said that, they did Shabam, which is a Les Mills kind of dance exercise. And they were just like, it's just like if Zumba was good. I was just like, no, please, Zumba is good. You just do a little bit of a salsa. I think it's also trash in the way that dance exercise classes as opposed to dance classes can be trash, in that you're not really looking at form or function or trying to do anything right. You're doing like the sort of bastardized version of salsa and merengue and Ciroc even, right? Like, and so I think that feels a little bit trashy to me, almost. Like, I certainly, when I go to classes, like, my dance background kind of comes out and I try and do the steps right and place my arms well. But I also know that, like, what we're doing in Zumba is salsa inspired, shall we say, rather than salsa itself.
Yeah, the dot that I immediately joined with Zumba when I first kind of became aware of it was with do you remember Tai Bo? I don't know if that's got any lasting presence, but it was like everywhere for a couple of years and then it seemingly disappeared without a trace. It was like, as Zumba is to actual Latin American dancing, Tai Bo was to martial arts.
So I think my mum did that for a few years. It's I love my mum very deeply, but I think it's similar to a lot of us. Her relationship with her body and her fitness has been somewhat defined by society. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. And that meant that we heard about a lot of diet and fitness fads growing up. And Tai Bo was absolutely one of them. And I mean, look, I try to take the approach to exercise that, like, if it makes you happy and if it gets you active, like, there's a pretty limited amount of harm it can do. And I think, like, that's as relevant to the trashy points as it will be when we start talking about, like, the problematic elements of Zumba. But, like, if, you're getting your steps, you're doing your cardio, you're making your body fitter and healthier. And I say this, like, absolutely, as someone with, like, a chronic injury, that means occasionally I can't really do that physically. Like, all of those things are kind of good, like, as an outcome. And it's very, very hard to have harms that outweigh those benefits of something like Zumba. We just get sweaty for an hour and do, like, some fake salsa. Yeah. So it's trash, but it's good trash.
Yeah, no, I can 100% see that, and it's the kind of thing that you can be very enthusiastic about without harming people or yourself. And the thing that you've mentioned kind of sideways a couple of times is that at least with your group, there's a very low bar to entry, so there's absolutely not any kind of gatekeeping about who can and can't do it, and all of those things sound fantastic.
Yeah, I think the lack of gatekeeping is fairly common in Zumba, but I don't know. I only know a few instructors, so I can only like really speak to them and how they approach it. But I think like that idea of just like you're here for a good time, like really, I think it resonates with a lot of people who become instructors, and I think it resonates with a lot of people who are sort of like constant attenders. And like we at my gym normally in the before times, we absolutely have like a solid group of people who are always at Zumba and like look forward to seeing each other there, and just sort of like, you know, we've got, and I live in a relatively small suburb, so I just see them around, and it's, you do this vaguely embarrassing thing. And so like there are a few people my age who go to Zumba, and if I see them out and about, they'll be like, oh, we met at the gym, and never mention what class it was at. But like there are some people who are just unabashedly enthusiastic about it. And I think it's that, yeah, it's that kind of energy that I want in my life and from people around me. And so, yeah, it's a bit trash, and there will always be people who are embarrassed of it or think something's a bit silly because it's, you know, done by old ladies, which is indicative of our society's problem and how we interact with and value older women more than anything else.
I was going to say actually that's it's kind of a separate conversation possibly to have in another place, but it does remind me of the kind of unique hate for Twilight as opposed to whatever the kind of masculine coded version of Twilight would be. You know, there's a thing.
Artemis Fowl?
Yeah, maybe. But you know, in the sense that once something is coded as for women, and yet worse, an identifiable demographic of women, it becomes kind of uniquely despisable.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And it's often like, particularly like I think with older women, and I'm sure there's plenty of material out there about this, about how like sort of older women are just discarded by our society after they get past a certain age. Like things that they're enthusiastic about or care deeply about or really enjoy are often just seen as a little bit sillier. Like you think acroaerobics can kind of fit into that same group of things that older women deeply enjoy, or at least take to in large numbers. And yeah, like that's a huge issue, but it's also a bigger problem than just Zumba.
Yeah, no, definitely. All right, well, look, this is a bit earlier than I would usually call this point, but I think what we'll do is we'll kind of neatly split before we start talking about the problematic bits. So what we might do is we might take a break now and be back right after this.
If you're a fan of NPR, listening to our podcasts and live stream has never been easier. Just search for accessmedia.nz on the App Store or Google Play and download the app with the kiwi fruit logo. Once you've got it, pick Manawatu People's Radio from the list of stations and go find your new favourite show. Support this show and others like it by giving a donation. For more information, go to www.mpr.nz/donate.
And we're back on Reserved Recommendations on Manawatu People's Radio, Te Reo Irirangi o ngā Tangata o Manawatu. And I'm talking today with Dr. Sophia Frentz. I remembered the doctor the first time this time. And we're talking about Zumba, and we've been talking really in the first half about how it is great trash and your trash, and in some ways not even really trash. But as you mentioned, there's kind of a problematic edge to it as well, and maybe that's what we'll talk about now?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So I think there are two parts of Zumba that I personally have found problematic as someone who engages with it as a participant, not an instructor. And I sort of want to hasten to say, like, I can't speak to how Zumba treats its instructors. I've heard good things from my instructor, but the fact that she is currently and still a Zumba instructor probably like reflects a bit on that. So I'm not going to dive into all of that. I think the two main elements which make me a little bit leery of Zumba when I'm doing it is, firstly, there's a set of tracks which are typically referred to as Bollywood tracks. And there are particular dance moves that exist alongside those tracks, which are, in the same way that like the artists of Zumba mimic salsa, they mimic the sort of more Bollywood dances. I would say the problematic aspect to this is that dance in a lot of Indian cultures is very culturally important and has very specific moves that mean particular things. And, I have a friend in Melbourne who she just always refers to it as Indian dance, so I can't speak to her particular culture, but does that as sort of 4 or 5 hours on every weekend practicing that. And so it makes me very quite uncomfortable during the Bollywood dances that we are kind of mimicking this really culturally important thing, and sort of aiming at almost those moves that are actually pretty key, whereas doing the sort of salsa step is less key to the culture that's drawn from. I think the other main problematic aspect is that Zumba also sort of draws from pop songs. So there's your Bollywood tracks, there's your traditional Spanish tracks, and then pop songs that it draws from. And there is, the short version of this is there's a track to Blurred Lines, which I'm pretty uncomfortable about. I think the longer way to say that would be that there is not a huge amount of oversight in selection of the pop songs to put tracks to. And there's not very much consideration for the words to those songs for people who are going to be hearing it for weeks on end when they're part of a current release. So those would be the two big ones. And sort of like I was saying sort of before the break, to me, the benefits of Zumba being a really easy to enter, easy to complete, active lifestyle thing alongside the community benefits that I particularly get, they hugely outweigh those problematic aspects to me. But I also I want to criticize my fave, I want to be able to recognize that those aspects are pretty problematic and kind of uncomfortable for me as a participant.
Yeah, they sort of seem a bit like a symptom of a kind of a similar underlying problem. There's definitely it feels to me from your description there's definitely kind of an official Zumba viewpoint, and it's not especially engaged with the cultural context of anything that it does. It seems.
Yeah, I think dancers and dance teachers and dancers can also not engage with those cultural things as much as would.
This is Hugh in post-production again. This is that bit that I mentioned at the start where everything just completely crapped out. So we stopped for a second and turned cameras off on our respective Zoom devices, and then came back to the conversation. Everything does improve from here on out. So thanks for sticking with us. All right,
where did you get up to?
We are now sans camera. You were talking about a room full of white people being told that they were going to do an African tribal dance and being kind of skeptical about that. That's about the point where it all went wrong audio-wise.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. So, and I think that's kind of reflective of a problem that dance as a sort of not cultural thing, but almost organization has, where dancers feel they are able to draw from things that inspire them without interrogating if that's cultural appropriation, basically. And I think that's where the Bollywood song problem of Zumba comes from, is this approach dancers and particularly like, white, Western, Anglo dance teachers, sort of recognizing that I think Zumba has been founded and mostly made by Spanish-speaking people. Like, those people don't more deeply think about the cultural implications of like pretending to do an Indian dance when like that's actually kind of disrespectful. I think the problem with like not interrogating the use of things like specific pop songs as they come out is more indicative of an unwillingness to engage beyond asking whether a song is a bop or not.
Yeah.
And they're definitely like linked issues, but they're subtly different.
Yeah, I was going to say that because I work in community access media, and what that means is that sometimes I end up doing sound for community events, which means I end up seeing lots and lots and lots of things like kids dance groups doing their performance for some cultural festival or occasionally May Day Workers Festival, all sorts of things like that. And in the course of doing that, I've noticed that when you're talking about dance classes for kids in the community, there is a similar kind of lack of oversight about what music gets picked and what its context are and what the words are saying. And so I found your comment about kind of dance generally interesting there, because I certainly have watched quite small children dance to songs, although I can't grab the songs out of my head right now. But been sitting there at the sound desk going, ugh.
Oh, absolutely. And I think like it's where like sort of us as people who engage with the arts, that's a terrible way to refer to myself. Like essentially like it's important to engage with people who are making new and different and interesting art when they do consider those things. So like here in Melbourne, we have Asia Topa, which is just beautiful dance done by Asian Australians and Asian immigrants to Australia that grapples like, with their heritage, but also with their engagement with modern dance, because it's very often that people who, don't quote unquote look like a ballerina don't tend to get access to, being able to do ballet or contemporary or a particular type of dance. And so engaging with organizations and things that start to break down those barriers, while also supporting people to explore their traditional dances and forms of dance in ways that are, respectful and meaningful more than anything else. Like, I think that's really valuable as patrons of the arts, if you will.
Yeah, and finding, and I guess the question is how we do this, but finding respectful ways to engage with things like Indian film music is always good. Partly because it's like this fascinating, relentlessly commercial in its own country thing that magpies from everywhere else and constantly spits back these completely fascinating mutant things that you would never see otherwise.
Oh, absolutely. And like, I think, none of this is meant to be a rag on Bollywood music and Bollywood dance is the thing. I think Bollywood's amazing. And I'm very, very glad that Netflix has been putting a lot of Bollywood films up there because that's the way I access my media. And it's exciting to see more in different forms of, non-Western dance and non-Western art being explored by people within like all sorts of communities. I think I think it was after I'd been here maybe 2 or 3 years, and I went back home to Tauranga for about a month and saw it was very demographically different than when I left when I was 17, and I was just so happy and excited for what that meant for the city as a whole. And like, not to turn a radio episode about Zumba to a soapbox on immigration, but like, it is really exciting to start seeing both like, Māori people in New Zealand being able to engage with traditional dance and kapa haka, all in a way that's like awesome and meaningful and valued, but also to have like really cool immigrant communities also having the space and ability to engage with their heritage in that way. Because I think for a lot of our history in New Zealand, like immigrants have had to assimilate pretty quickly in order to survive here rather than to continue to embrace their heritage. And I think allowing and supporting and engaging people to do that is going to be just like so good for the New Zealand art scene, right? Like, I'm excited for it. I love the art stuff that's coming out of New Zealand right now.
No, definitely. And I think, I mean, there's a point about Zumba that we can come back to that I'll just try and file in the back of my head. But I think you're entirely right there. And the thing that's really that I'm finding really interesting in terms of New Zealand arts are the people who are kind of a generation or a generation and a half in, and kind of acting as bridges between mainstream New Zealand culture and their ancestral cultures, and are kind of interpreting both to each other at the same time. I find that stuff really interesting. The other thing that I think is really good for you as a white person, that I get the opportunity to do a fair bit through my job, which is probably a privilege, is to be put in situations where you have no idea what's going on and you just kind of have to deal with it. So we've got quite a lot of Bhutanese refugees here in Palmerston North, and they get us to help out with an event which is called... No, it's completely gone out of my name. Gone out of my head. Anyway, it's an annual event which is the birthday of their national poet, and they do a big festival of kind of cultural programs, which is all the kids doing their pieces so that their mums and dads can see them on the stage, and it's all done in Nepali. So none of us have the faintest idea what's going on. We just try and make the sound work as best we can. But that experience of being there and people are cracking up at jokes which are clearly like deep cultural cuts that everyone gets, and you have no context for it at all. It's kind of, I don't know, it's not an experience that you get as a white person that often.
Yeah, I think generally the sort of idea I try to live by and try to integrate as much as I can into my life is this idea that if you're not uncomfortable, you're not really growing. And so like, while it is exceptionally difficult to kind of sit with discomfort and to let yourself feel like bad or small or left out, like those as feelings suck to hold on to, but it's really important for your growth as a person to be able to sit with those and just be like, man, I feel really left out. Wait, like other people must feel like this when, you know, they're in a room that maybe is only white people or is only men or is only people of a particular age. And I think sort of like exploring your privilege in that way is really meaningful.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing that makes those events for us survivable is the fact that they look after you and feed you until it comes out your ears. And so, you know, the knowledge that it's kind of kindness and consideration that makes that survivable is a good thing to carry with you. I guess the point where I was going to come back to with the conversation about Zumba is, do you feel like there is any way in which when Zumba does something like borrow a Bollywood song or anything like that, that it's creating any kind of curiosity that would cause people to go out and check out the source material?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think, I mean, Zumba is done sort of like all across Melbourne, certainly, and a lot of places in New Zealand for sure. And the people it tends to attract, I mean, it really depends on where you are, but like, yeah, like I said, like it's a lot of middle-aged or older, often white in New Zealand, particularly ladies. I live in a heavily immigrant suburb because I am an immigrant in Melbourne. And so like that's not so much what we see here, but that means that like this might be their first exposure to something like Bollywood music. It might be their first exposure to like, you know, a set of 3 songs in a row where they can't understand the language that it's in. And I think like that has some value to it, absolutely. But I think like not the flip side, but like the sort of like similar experience that I have is Zumba is one of the few times in my life where I am in a room that's almost entirely women, where I am one of the youngest. And usually there'll be a handful of us who are in our 20s. And I think it's been really, really good for me and sort of has put me in a position where I can sort of go off like I did earlier about how society mistreats older women, to talk to all of these women who are in their, you know, 50s and 60s who don't feel like they're over the hill, but everyone else is trying to tell them that they are. And they're just like awesome, brilliant older women who I am better for knowing them. And it's like, it's really broken my little like young privilege bubble a bit open. Because I've gone from sort of, you know, studying for 8 years at university, and being surrounded, particularly near the end, by people who are my age, maybe a bit older, maybe a handful of people who are much older, and people who are younger than me. Particularly and even in scenarios where it's sort of entirely women and non-binary people. And seeing the other side of that, where I am quite young compared to a lot of people there, and entering that space with curiosity has been really, I think, really valuable for me, and my growth as a person.
Yeah, a thing occurred to me a couple of episodes back. I was talking to a friend of mine about his evolving faith as a Christian, and there's a quote from the Screwtape Letters from C.S. Lewis, who was in many ways a creep, but I think right about this specific thing, about the value of kind of communities of common interest, in which case he was talking about churches, but you know, you could expand it to Zumba classes, I think, about the necessity of being put into situations with people who are there because they share the thing that you're into, but you don't necessarily have that much in common with them, and you have to expand your definition of humanity to include them.
Yeah, I would say my gym, more than just Zumba classes within that space, fulfills the kind of social role of the church for me, which is something I think I've been looking for a while, maybe not consciously while I was at university, because university ostensibly provides that for you, but definitely throughout my PhD, we're getting into the weeds now, Hugh. I experienced an increasing discomfort with how unlike the other PhD students I was. And some of that was the fact that I knew I didn't want to be an academic. I had, you know, no interest in doing 20 years of postdocs, if you're lucky. And some of that, I think, is just the fact that I had a lot of interest and a lot of passions that existed outside of the world of science and academia. And that wasn't really embraced, certainly not at my research institution or the other ones that I interacted with a lot. And my gym, my beautiful church-like gym, my local YMCA, publicly funded, absolute, like, wonderful people there. Like, of course you have interests outside of the gym. Of course the gym isn't your whole life. Like, obviously you have, you know, a lot of the time a job or studies or, like, passion projects that you're working on, and to interact with people. And, yeah, it's mostly in group fitness classes. So it's, like, mostly in Zumba and the few body classes that I did, but also with the instructors, to have, like, all of these people who just love the fact that you're there and will say hi when you bump into them at the supermarket, often right after your group fitness class because the supermarket's across the road, like, who'll always stop and have a chat with you and recommend a cafe you might not have gone to before. Like, that has almost like, it has a really deep meaning to me in the way that I have seen other people find meaning in the social aspect of their churches.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly sounds a lot like the role that a church would play in people's lives at the point where that was like the major social thing that everybody did, but also people for whom there was nothing but church were regarded with some degree of suspicion. It's where you meet people, it's how you make social connections, and also you're expected to turn up on Sunday, but you're not expected to turn up the rest of the time unless there's something special happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, look, this has been a fascinating conversation about a thing which I knew precisely nothing about. There are two things that I like to do by way of rounding out these episodes, and the first is to ask if there is anything that you could recommend by way of like extra reading or things to watch or things to listen to about any of the stuff that we've talked about, really.
I would probably recommend, if you haven't tried a Zumba class, like, check out your local, right? Because it might just be what you love. I never expected to be as into Zumba as I am, apparently, talking about it on the radio. And so, like, if you're curious of anything that I've said around, like, the sort of joy I find from it, the community I find for it resonates with you, like, absolutely go and check that out. Have a good time. But I think beyond that, nothing currently springs to mind.
Okay, cool. I had one recommendation, which is that as regards the kind of the disproportionate hate for things that are labelled for demographically identifiable groups of women, the best kind of encapsulation of someone interrogating that I've seen is a video on YouTube called something like "I'm Sorry, Stephanie Meyer," which is by a woman called Lindsay Ellis. And it's an interrogation of her own reaction to Twilight when Twilight was new and where she thought all of that stuff came from. It's about 20 odd minutes from memory, but it's a really good kind of investigation from someone who participated in it of where and why and how all of that stuff happens.
Awesome.
And also, as Sophia said, like, just watch Indian movies if you have Netflix.
Yes.
The thing that I have found about them is that they're like, if you imagine turning up the saturation on an image, they're like that, but for like everything.
Yeah. If you need a gateway Indian movie, Pride and Prejudice is the one that, like, was released in movies here, and so you might have seen or you might have heard of it. And then I really like the English translation is like Queen, and it's a fantastic one. It's about a woman who, like, I think breaks it off with her fiance or leaves her husband or something because it turns out he sucks, and just goes like backpacking and has a great time and finds herself. And in the end, she's really happy. It's such a good story.
That does sound great. The one that I think my wife and I found our way in through was, I can't remember the name of it at all, but we're quite big horror movie watchers, and it was an Indian horror movie about this woman who goes and seeks out a reclusive spiritualist type gentleman because her husband's been afflicted with a curse. But the thing that sticks with me about it is, like, surprise twist, the spiritualist is really the man that she left 20 years ago. Surprise twist again! He's causing the curse so that he can get her back. Surprise twist again! He's had a last-minute change of heart and now he needs to fight demons. And it just kind of keeps doing like that kind of escalation over and over again, and it's great.
Oh, very good.
So, last thing that I like to do is... do you have anything to plug? You were hosting a podcast for a while that is sadly on indefinite hiatus because it was quite good. But are there other things
thank you.
On the internet or otherwise that you're doing, or people that you like are doing, that you want to point people in the direction of?
Yeah, so I feel like I'm taking a little bit of almost like a hiatus from external stuff, because I finally have a job that is scratching a lot of that itch for me. And that's been like really nice and rewarding, but it means I'm putting out less content. I think generally there are two things I want to plug. Archer Magazine, which is a queer magazine sort of like released worldwide, based in Melbourne. If you are young and queer and you want to break into journalism or start writing something, or you have a story to tell, they absolutely take pictures. If you are not part of that community, or you are and you just want to read some really good writing, they have both online and print versions. I've written for them before. I have some friends who are in the current print version. The other one is my close personal friend, Katie Mack, has recently released a book called The End of Everything, Astrophysically Speaking. It is a ripper of a read. I had my copy on pre-order from April and I just got it. So I was clearly quite excited for it. Obviously she's a close personal friend, so I was always going to be this excited for it, but she'll never listen to this, so I can say honestly that it's actually very good. Yeah, I think it's a wonderful wee read about just the heat death of the universe. You know, if you want to read about a apocalypse that won't happen for billions of years, it's a good one.
It sounds like a distraction from the kind of slow motion ongoing series of apocalypses that people deal with on the daily. So that's a good recommendation.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, I haven't read anything from Archer Magazine. Perhaps I should go and check it out. But on the topic of, if you're not in the communities but you want to read good writing, that's another thing that you can do to put yourself in that space of being presented with something that is good but not for you, which, you know, as I say, as a white person, and particularly a white bloke, is well worth doing to yourself from time to time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Archer Magazine does that very well, in that, you know, I am a non-binary, bisexual disaster person who like is quite engaged with the queer community and has been for some years, and pretty much on a weekly basis Archer will put out something that will cause me to think about things in a different way, or engage, or just like introduce me to a new viewpoint, or engage with something in a really different way. And so I think even for people who are all about that, like it's such an eye-opener of a publication.
Well, that is a recommendation and a half, and that's where we'll leave it this time around. Thank you very much for talking.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Reserved Recommendations, a radio show and podcast from Manawatu People's Radio, Te Reo Irirangi o ngā tangata o Manawatu. The show is produced and presented by me, Hugh Dingwall, and I also composed our theme music. It's called Sack Jazz, and you can find it at wolfboy.bandcamp.com. You can find me on the internet at Objective Realty on Twitter, and you can find the show on Facebook under Reserved Recommendations. If you've got a reserved reserved recommendation of your own, feel free to pitch it to me in either of those two places. And if you enjoyed the show, why not go ahead and recommend it to a friend? You can find past episodes at www.mpr.nz/show/reserved on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, Manawatu People's Radio is a non-profit radio station. If you enjoy this or any of their other fine audio programming, why not fling them a couple of dollars? Go to mpr.nz/donate for more information.